This tale unfolded over several months back in 2019, and even today, just recalling it stirs up a deep unease that I've only hinted at with a few close friends. Certain elements are still tough for me to wrap my head around. At age 28, I landed a gig on the graveyard shift at a convenience store attached to a gas station in a tiny mining community in Pennsylvania named Coolidge. The town's name has been switched up for privacy, but it was very much a genuine spot, squeezed between wooded slopes and derelict coal facilities that had closed their doors back in the 1970s. The local population had shrunk to around 800 residents, mostly elderly individuals who'd lived there their whole lives with no other options. The younger crowd bolted at the first chance. I ended up there after blowing through my savings following a layoff from my old job in Pittsburgh, desperate for quick cash. The wages were dismal, yet housing costs were low, and I planned to scrape together enough in half a year to rebuild my life. The shop, known as Quick Stop, perched on the outskirts of town along Route 29, the sole major thoroughfare slicing through Coolidge. My hours stretched from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. On most evenings, business was eerily still. I'd handle perhaps 10 patrons at most. Typically, long-haul drivers rolling by or townsfolk picking up smokes and lotto cards en route to the sawmill about 20 miles southward. The isolation suited me fine. I passed the time with books, scrolling clips on my cell, and tidying displays that scarcely required it. One steady visitor showed up nearly every night near 2 a.m. His name was Gerald, somewhere in his late 50s or early 60s, sporting sparse gray locks and a sturdy frame. He stuck to a navy blue work coat marred by grease spots on the cuffs and a worn emblem I never could decipher clearly. Gerald kept things courteous but brief. He'd grab a pack of Marlboro Reds, a cup of Black Joe, and occasionally a ham sub from the refrigerated section. Payment came in precise coins, doled out deliberately from a leather pouch tucked in his coat. Our chats stayed surface level, small talk on the forecast or the Steelers, but nothing invasive. He carried that subdued, battle-scarred air common among guys in fading communities, as if existence had already worn them ragged, leaving them to merely endure until it all wrapped up. For the initial 2 months on the job, Gerald appeared right on schedule. Then, come late September, he vanished from the routine. Initially, it didn't faze me much. Habits shift, after all. Perhaps his work hours changed, or he relocated. Yet after a week without sight of him, curiosity gnawed at me. A second week elapsed, then a third. I brought it up with my boss, Carol, who'd managed the place for more than 10 years. She just gave a nonchalant lift of her shoulders. _0. Still, Gerald's no-show nagged at something inside me, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Perhaps the job's tedium had me latching on to trivial things, or it was sheer gut instinct. Either way, an undercurrent of wrongness lingered. During one especially sluggish evening in mid-October, I began quizzing the usuals about him. Many drew blanks on who I meant. An elderly regular, Frank, who swung by nightly for instant win cards, recalled that Gerald might have done upkeep at a defunct mine site long before, but admitted he hadn't spotted the man lately either. That shift, the unease, clung like fog. Against my better judgment, I dipped into the store's reward system database, our seldom-used loyalty setup, and searched his name. He'd enrolled ages back. It turned out his complete name was Gerald Eugene Kepler. I jotted the name on a torn piece of receipt and headed home once my work shift wrapped up. The remainder of that day, I scoured the internet for details about him. There wasn't a lot. Nothing on social media, no death notices, no reports in the papers. All I uncovered was a real estate listing indicating that Gerald Kepler owned a modest home on Maple Street in Cridge, roughly 2 miles away from the shop. It described the place as a one-family dwelling constructed in 1962. That summed it up. No contact info, no family mentions, zilch. I tried convincing myself to drop the matter. It wasn't any of my concern. Yet the idea kept nagging away at the back of my mind. Suppose something terrible had befallen him. Imagine if he'd collapsed or suffered a cardiac event, with no one the wiser since he resided solo. Cridge struck me as the sort of town where folks minded their own affairs. You could pass away in your dwelling, and it might take weeks for anybody to catch on. A couple of evenings afterward, following another shift, I cruised by Gerald's place. Dawn was just breaking, the heavens a washed-out gray, and the road lay deserted. The residence was a compact, single-level building featuring flaking white exterior and a drooping entry veranda. The lawn teemed with unkempt foliage, while the postbox brimmed with letters and circulars. I pulled over to the opposite side and observed for a short while. No illumination shone from within. Zero motion, zero indication of occupancy. I stepped from my vehicle and approached the entrance. I rapped on it. Silence. I pounded harder the second go. Still zilch. I ought to have summoned the authorities on the spot. Yet I held off. Can't say precisely why. Perhaps I figured they'd dismiss me or advise sticking to my lane. Rather, I tested the knob. It turned freely. The portal swung inward with a groan, and an odor assaulted me at once. Not outright the stench of decay, but something musty and off-kilter, as if the building had been shut tight for ages. I crossed the threshold and shouted Gerald's name. The sound reverberated across the vacant spaces. The inside felt shadowy, drapes blocking the light, and a fine dust coated every surface. The furnishings appeared untouched for weeks on end. A partly consumed tumbler of water rested on the dining surface in the kitchen, alongside a periodical from September 20th, and mud-encrusted footwear stood near the entryway. I combed through the interior space by space, my pulse racing wildly. I discovered zilch. No remains, no evidence of conflict, just a deserted abode suspended in the past. The sleeping quarters showed a neatly arranged mattress, the wardrobe only partially stocked. By the lavatory basin, a brush leaned in a mug. It seemed as though Gerald had merely stepped away one morning and vanished for good. As I prepared to depart, my eye caught a portal at the corridor's terminus, which I'd first taken for a storage nook. I swung it wide to reveal a tight set of steps plunging into a lower level. The draft rising from beneath felt chilly and moist, carrying the distant patter of liquid in the gloom. I activated my mobile's light and ventured downward. The understory lacked finishing, raw cement underfoot and raw timbers overhead, cluttered with aged pieces and crates lining the sides. In the distant angle, another entrance appeared. This one appeared more recent, secured by a robust latch. My gut clenched. I approached and tugged the grip. secured. Scanning about, I spotted a key dangling from a peg concealed behind an upright post. My fingers quivered while I fitted it in and eased the barrier ajar. The sight awaiting me in that chamber would linger in my nightmares forever. It measured perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, walled in concrete blocks with a lone naked lamp suspended above. The ground bore dark blotches I preferred not to name. Along the rear partition stood a steel rack piled with ledgers, scores of matching dark ledger pads. Nearby, another held vessels brimming with items resembling accessories, bands, chains, timepieces. Images were fastened to the partitions, instant shots of individuals, chiefly females, a few trussed and silenced, others mere likenesses. At the heart lay a timber seat fitted with bindings on the supports and supports. I retreated from the space, my thoughts reeling from the horror. Fumbling for my phone, I punched in emergency services. In hushed tones, I relayed my location and the discoveries to the operator. She urged me to exit the premises at once and remain curbside until law enforcement arrived. The initial squad vehicle showed up in under 10 minutes, though time dragged like eternity. I lingered on the pavement, quivering, averting my gaze from the structure. Soon enough, the thoroughfare buzzed with officers, highway patrol, crime scene units, and sleuths. They cordoned the whole area. My interrogation stretched beyond 3 hours, starting with town cops, advancing to state probes, culminating with federal agents. In the ensuing weeks, fragments of the tale emerged gradually. Even today, portions stay under wraps. Those ledgers proved to be diaries, detailed chronicles of kidnappings, violations, and killings stretching across more than 15 years. Gerald Eugene Kepler turned out to be far from the man I'd imagined. Gerald operated as a serial hunter preying on wanderers and transients in rural Pennsylvania and nearby areas, people like drifters and sex workers who wouldn't draw much notice if they vanished. The images displayed on his walls aligned with no fewer than 11 unsolved missing persons reports from 3 different states. Those containers held mementos pilfered from his prey. Officials suspect he exploited the disused mine shafts and derelict spots near Coolidge for hiding the corpses. For months, recovery crews scoured crumbling tunnels and waterlogged excavations. They unearthed bones from 6 people. The others remain unaccounted for, likely interred in spots too obscure to uncover. Gerald's whereabouts are unknown to this day. His pickup turned up deserted in an Ohio Walmart lot just 3 days prior to my unearthing his dwelling. Camera recordings captured him striding off from the truck and vanishing into the nearby timberline. Certain detectives reckon he's gone, that he ended it all once he sensed his deeds were closing in. Still, some posit he's out there somewhere, assuming a fresh alias, perhaps resuming his habits in yet another remote settlement. I departed Cridge a couple of weeks into the probe. Staying put had become impossible. Whenever I shut my eyes, that chamber haunted me. The snapshots, the diaries. Gerald lingers in my thoughts, the way he'd drop by my shop each evening, courteous and ordinary, concealing a legacy of atrocities in his weary gaze. I reflect on the countless occasions I passed him his brew and smokes, offering a grin and a farewell, oblivious to his true essence. The key takeaway from all this? Evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face. It blends in seamlessly. They dwell in our midst, frequent our businesses, exchange pleasantries. We remain clueless until the damage is irreversible. Heed your gut feelings. If unease stirs, it's likely justified. And should you encounter a scenario akin to mine, act swiftly. Alert the police without delay. You could be the barrier preventing a stalker from claiming another target. This tale unfolds over roughly 3 years, and even today, revisiting it sets my hands trembling. Certain elements still evoke that icy terror seeping into my core. I'm Isabella, and the events I'm recounting unfolded on our family homestead in Pennsylvania's Western Hill region, amid thick woods where the closest folks live more than 2 miles off. I was 24 at the outset. I'd returned home post-graduation with my agricultural science diploma. My dad had died the winter before, leaving Mom to manage the property alone until I could assist. Our spread covered around 80 acres, mainly grazing fields for the herd, hemmed in by heavy timber on 3 flanks. Secluded, sure, but it offered tranquility, at least in theory. Things kicked off toward the end of September. Chilly dawns had set in, and while inspecting the eastern field's barriers, I spotted an odd disturbance. The earth along the woodland edge was ripped open, profound scratches in the ground resembling talons, yet oversized beyond any creature I could identify. Having grown up on that land, I'm familiar with bear impressions, coyote trails, even the digs from feral pigs foraging. None of this fit. The impressions were enormous, spanning at least 6 inches apiece, carved with immense power. I snapped pics on my cell and forwarded them to a buddy with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, figuring it might be an afflicted bear. His feedback dragged uncharacteristically. When it arrived, it merely urged steering clear of the trees and phoning if more oddities appeared. That unsettled me. He's typically straightforward and no nonsense. This evasive alert hinted at withheld knowledge. 7 days on, I discovered the initial kill. One of the heifers, our juvenile Angus named Betsy, lay lifeless in the northwest field. Not a serene passing or a swift takedown by some beast, she'd been savaged. Her neck mangled, chest cavity wrenched apart, chunks of viscera gone. Blood saturated the surrounding soil, with identical huge talon scars trailing into the tree line. I rang my Game Commission contact once more. He arrived personally this round. He surveyed the site, shot photos, and probed the remains for well over 60 minutes in near silence. At last, he advised corralling the other livestock nearer the outbuildings after dark, adding perimeter floodlights on sensors and arming myself if unarmed. I inquired about what sort of creature might have caused this, and he simply shook his head, admitting he had no idea, though he'd heard of comparable events in nearby areas. That detail lingered in my mind. His words implied this wasn't a one-off event, but rather something prowling across the countryside, slaughtering animals and causing chaos wherever it went. I pushed for additional details, yet he wouldn't say more. Instead, he warned me to stay vigilant and departed. I followed all his advice closely. I shifted the herd to the field nearest the farmhouse, set up motion-activated floodlights surrounding the stable, and retrieved my grandfather's vintage Remington 870 shotgun from the cellar. I gave it a thorough cleaning, loaded it up, and placed it right next to my bed each evening. My mom believed I was exaggerating, but she hadn't witnessed the horror I had. She hadn't viewed Betsy torn to shreds, the raw brutality of the attack. For several weeks, calm returned. The cows seemed uneasy, more jittery than normal, yet no further attacks occurred. I began hoping the thing had simply wandered off elsewhere. But then came October, and the situation intensified dramatically. It happened on a Thursday evening, shortly past midnight. I was dozing when the herd's desperate cries jolted me awake. This wasn't their typical soft calling during unease. It was pure panic, the desperate noises of beasts sensing impending doom. Snatching the shotgun, I dashed out in my sleepwear and boots, my pulse racing wildly. The sensor lights had activated, bathing the stable in stark, bright illumination. The animals huddled against the distant railing, their eyes bulging, breath fogging the chilly air from their flared nostrils. That's when I spotted it. Right at the boundary where the light dissolved into gloom, a figure loomed. It was enormous, towering at least 7 or 8 feet, stooped a bit with elongated muscular limbs dangling below its knees. Dark, tangled fur shrouded its form, and its eyes caught the beams with an eerie, golden shimmer. We locked gazes for an instant. My breaths came in harsh, uneven gasps, mingled with the cow's frenzied calls echoing behind me. Suddenly it shifted, not advancing on me, but gliding laterally, staying in the dim fringes. Its movements held a sleek, hunter's elegance unlike any bear or beast I'd encountered. Trembling uncontrollably, I lifted the shotgun, struggling to hold it firm, and yelled at it. I can't recall my exact words, just senseless shouts meant to drive it away. It halted, cocking its head as though appraising me, before pivoting and vanishing into the night. The velocity of its retreat was terrifying. In one blink it was visible. In the next, the woods had engulfed it completely, as if it had never been real. I remained frozen in place, weapon at the ready, braced for its return. It never came. At last, I retreated indoors, securing all entrances and shutters, then spent the rest of the night in the kitchen under full illumination, the gun resting on my knees until dawn broke. Come morning, I discovered new prints. They were unprecedented. Enormous impressions resembling distorted human feet, stretched out and oversized beyond belief. Everyone measured roughly 18 inches, sunk deeply into the damp soil along the barrier. I snapped photos, took measurements, even made plaster molds. I recorded it all meticulously. I forwarded the pictures to my contact at the wildlife agency, and this time his reply was swift. He urged me to get in touch with the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, noting they had experts in such phenomena. Bigfoot. The term sounded ridiculous even in my thoughts, but desperation won out. I contacted the group, and just 2 days later, a specialist called Allen arrived at the property. He inspected the footprints, the scratches, the spot of Betsy's death. He positioned trail cams in the timberline, sound devices by the grazing area, and explained that I was probably facing an aggressive male defending its domain, as livestock deaths often happened in regions short on natural prey. He added that sightings like mine, where the entity permitted observation, were unusual. Typically, they shunned people altogether. Its behavior, lingering to observe and prowl, indicated either gauging my reaction or claiming ground. In any case, it spelled trouble. Over the following month, I existed in perpetual tension. The shotgun stayed within reach during sleep. I monitored the cams compulsively, and each dawn, I patrolled the land for traces of its comeback. The devices detected motion repeatedly, vague silhouettes slipping among the trunks after dark, though nothing sharp enough for positive confirmation. The microphones snagged odd sounds, profound rumbling cries reverberating across the ridges, foreign to my ears. Then, in mid-November, it struck once more. On this occasion, it targeted one of the bulls, a gigantic beast tipping the scales at more than 1,000 pounds. I discovered the bull in the northwest field once more, its throat ripped apart and rib cage exposed. The savagery matched the previous attack, the ferocity impossible to mistake. This entity possessed the power to overpower an adult bovine. I contacted Alan right away. He arrived with a couple of fellow investigators, and they launched a thorough probe. They gathered fur strands caught on the razor wire barrier for lab testing. Additional prints appeared, bigger than before, and they noted further eerie calls. Yet for all the proof we amassed and recorded, we failed to snag any sharp images of the beast. The slayings ceased from then on. As winter set in, the thing, whatever its nature, appeared to fade away. Alan suggested it might have shifted to another region or entered a dormant phase from the chill. He urged me to stay alert, warning it could re-emerge come spring with plentiful prey available once more. That season, I offloaded half my herd. The ongoing losses were unsustainable financially, but worse was the unrelenting dread. My mom dismissed my worries as overblown, claiming I was succumbing to unfounded suspicions. However, she hadn't witnessed the horrors I had. She never gripped a rifle in the pitch black, observing an impossible being prowl just beyond the glow. 3 years have passed since. No sign of the creature has surfaced, or so it seems. Still, nocturnal sounds reach me at times, guttural howls resounding across the ridges, and I spot occasional paw marks by the woodland border. The motion sensors catch fleeting shapes darting amid the trees, too massive and swift for elk or bears. The firearm stays ready, the property stays illuminated, and I steer clear of the forest after sunset without fail. Locals label me unhinged, convinced solitude has frayed my nerves, but they missed the terror I faced. They never locked eyes with those glowing yellow orbs and sensed the ancient dread of scrutiny from a hill-stalking predator. One absent from any nature encyclopedia or beast compendium. Alan drops by now and then. He mentions a surge in reports across Pennsylvania, indicating these beings are growing bolder and more frequent. He views my run-in as noteworthy, the ferocity atypical, perhaps a defense of its domain or young. I can't identify it. Not sure if it's Sasquatch or another unknown hunter, but its reality is undeniable. It slaughtered my stock. It observed me from the shadows and melted away tracelessly. Out in the thick woods of western Pennsylvania, it lingers, prowling, biding its time among the slopes. If you're in the countryside, with animals or land bordering timber, heed the warnings. Odd prints, bizarre cries, livestock acting skittish. Don't brush it off as nerves. Don't chalk it up to wolves or foxes. Occasionally, the night stalkers pose threats beyond your wildest lessons. And upon sighting it, meeting its gaze and shivering with that icy instinctual horror, comprehension will dawn. You'll grasp your solitude's illusion that the wild conceals horrors we refuse to face. Let me begin by noting this tale still sends chills down my spine, even after more than 10 years. Some elements stay hazy, incidents I can't rationalize, and a conclusion that mocks every sensible explanation I've attempted. I'm Harry, and this account unfolded in a quiet Pennsylvania community amid my bleakest days. I wed at 21. We were recent graduates, naive and impulsive, certain we'd met our lifelong match in our second college year. Looking back, we were kids pretending at adulthood, woefully unequipped for marital demands. The union endured scarcely 2 years before collapsing. By 23, we were divorced, and the dissolution wasn't a fiery clash. It resembled a gradual, choking disintegration, our shared foundation dissolving to nothing. The true agony wasn't the split, but its assault on my identity. My folks endured several breakups. I watched their bonds shatter repeatedly in childhood. I vowed to diverge from that pattern, select wisely, forge endurance, shatter the chain. Instead, I faltered. I picked poorly. I couldn't mend it. Abruptly, I joined the tally of flops, another marital casualty bolstering the heritage I'd fought to evade. Shortly after the documents cleared, I relocated to a modest leased cottage on the town's fringe. It was affordable, remote, and precisely the retreat I craved. I craved separation from the world, a quiet spot to grapple with the fallout without endless queries or sympathetic glances from folks who imagined they got it. The place was ancient, likely thrown up back in the 1950s, complete with squeaky boards underfoot and chilly drafts sneaking through the panes. Perched at the terminus of a dirt-packed lane, it was hemmed in by dense forest, with the closest folks living a good half-mile off. That remoteness ought to have soothed me, yet it only intensified the weight of it all. The quiet pressed down like a heavy blanket. Come evening, each snap and shift of the structure echoed louder, leaving me wide-eyed in the dark for what seemed like forever. Mentally dissecting every blunder from my failed union. Rest turned elusive. Whenever I finally nodded off, fitful, broken visions would drain me further. Soon enough, the terrors kicked in. Initially, I chalked them up to tension. Splitting up messes with your head, throws off your rhythms, drags out buried mental junk. Yet these weren't your run-of-the-mill bad dreams. They repeated relentlessly, identical down to the last detail, like a loop my inner mind wouldn't pause. In it, I'd find myself in the rented home's galley, pitch black outside, save for the faint glow of the moon slipping past the sill over the basin. I'd be there, maybe scrubbing plates or gazing into the void when that noise would hit. The rear entrance, opening from the galley onto the modest timber porch, would ease ajar with a drawn-out creak, and in she'd step. A young woman, not my former spouse, but with hints that evoked her somehow, draped in a lengthy pale gown, like something from a vintage snapshot, smeared with dirt and foliage, as though she'd trudged the timberline endlessly. Her dark locks clung in matted, sodden clumps along her spine, veiling her upper back. Her features stayed hidden every instance. She'd advanced deliberately, leaving soggy, grimy trails over the tiles, halting right under the loft ladder. Ours was that foldable wooden setup from the ceiling, and in the vision, it dangled perpetually, like a gaping maw poised to devour. She'd linger motionless below it, facing away. I'd attempt words, probing her presence, her intent. Lips would part, phrases shape up in my throat, but nothing escaped. Then, after ages of hush, she'd unleash it. Not a mortal cry, no, something raw and ancient, resonating deep, rattling my frame till my skeleton throbbed. With that wail, the dwelling would start to give way. Not in a rush, but deliberate, piece by piece, her tone fraying existence itself. Plaster would fissure, boards warp, overhead beams shatter and shower fragments. I'd strive to flee, but my limbs froze. Rooted, I'd witness the ruin unfold. Then, bolt upright in reality, soaked through, pulse racing, lungs burning for breath. Night after night it replayed. Over almost 3 months, on 95% of the evenings I dozed, that precise horror gripped me. It twisted into outright agony. Bedtime loomed like dread. I'd knock back booze to dull the edges and conk out, praying the liquor would stifle the visions. No dice. I'm wired for stories and signs, always pulled to the hidden layers, the figures our depths paint to speak truths. Couldn't ignore the echoes, the anonymous figure, the decaying shelter, the quiet exploding into chaos. Obviously, my brain unpacking the split, the marriage's downfall, the sturdy base I'd banked on crumbling to dust. I grasped it on a rational level, but grasping didn't halt it. Worse, spotting the intent deepened the sting, knowing my own thoughts were the tormentor, with zero clue to end it. The vision clung like a tangible curse. I ditched the sleeping quarters entirely. Can't recall opting in deliberately, but soon I was just flopping on the den sofa. That room carried a tainted vibe, poisoned by the phantoms. I'd sprawl there, TV droning, its glow and murmur battling the stifling void. Slumber would claim me bit by bit. Useless, though. The sequence stalked wherever I laid my head, no matter the tricks to break the cycle. She'd enter, pause at the loft drop, shriek till all shattered. Until one evening, a shift occurred. Tuesday, early December sometime. Dozing on the sofa, I snapped alert at precisely 2 a.m. Glanced at my cell to confirm. I got a message from a buddy, nothing exciting, just chatting about grabbing drinks later that week, and I shot back a quick reply. Quote 1 right then. It came. A knock on the front door. Gentle, intentional, 3 measured raps on the wood. My veins turned to ice. I was out on a dead-end gravel lane, far from any town, smack in the dead of night. No one had business being there. No one even knew my spot. I stayed rooted to the couch, gripped tight on the phone, ears straining. Then another set of knocks, 3 more, equally unhurried, equally precise. I made myself stir. I edged toward the window by the door and eased the curtain aside just a sliver to glance out. The porch bulb had fizzled out ages ago, and I'd never swapped it, leaving everything swallowed in gloom. Yet there she was, a silhouette of my steps, half hidden by the dark, dressed in a white hoodie, hood up with long black strands tumbling from under it. My pulse halted. It was her, the one from my nightmares. Except this wasn't sleep. I was alert. I'd just texted. The chill leaked in through the glass. A trace of fireplace smoke lingered in the air. Reality hit hard, and she lingered on my stoop, expectant. Every gut feeling yelled to leave it shut, pretend she wasn't there, barricade myself in, and hold out till dawn. But at 23, worn ragged by endless mental strain over months, I couldn't rely on those signals anymore. I cracked the door open, wide enough for a better view, but not an invite. She didn't budge, just hovered, chin dipped low, locks veiling her expression. Her words slipped out, soft as a breath. Underscore, quote, underscore, to, underscore, so ordinary, so harmless. Like a lost driver, someone in a bind, or a local needing aid. The shadows hid her face. The dim porch and hood cloaked her traits. But her tone, hushed and rehearsed, sold the story of distress. Ignoring the alarms in my skull, I passed the phone through the narrow opening. She claimed it, lifted it to her cheek, the light flaring across her. For the first time, I saw her plain, youthful, perhaps 18 to 22, with unremarkable looks that'd blend into any group. She tapped a bit on the display, pressed it to her ear, murmured, "Hey, I could use some help." A beat. "Yeah, okay." Then she returned it. I checked the screen. Dial pad open, no digits punched, no outgoing call, log blank. Puzzled, I glanced up to question her, but she'd evaporated. No footsteps fading, no car starting, just erased. I ventured onto the porch, peered down the drive, swept the yard. Empty. She'd dissolved entirely, like she'd never existed. Shivering in the biting December chill, phone clutched tight, heart racing, I tried to wrap my head around it. Back indoors, I bolted the door, secured every pane and latch, then huddled on the sofa under full lights till morning broke. Sleep evaded me. Wouldn't come. But the real puzzle, the one that gnaws at me still, robbing rest on bad nights, is this. From that evening on, the nightmares ended. Gone forever. For 3 solid months, that loop had plagued me. The shadowy girl in the white gown. The cries. The crumbling home. And then she materialized outside. Poof. No more visions. Not a single return. Her real-world visit seemed to snap the tie between my mind and that terror. I've chased other repeatin' dreams across years, popping up and fading without rhyme or reason. But this beast, ruling my nights unchecked, fled the instant she knocked. No logic fits it. 2 months on, I rolled home from hanging with pals to discover a break-in. The house wrecked. Gadgets swiped, cabinets dumped, all worth anything hauled off. Cops took a statement, but the culprit stayed a ghost. I've mulled if it linked. Was she casing the joint? The phone ploy a cover to eyeball my stuff. Verify solo living. Gauge the score. It tracks rationally, matches the pieces. Yet it skips the dream's abrupt halt. It dodges why she mirrored my sleep stalker so closely. Some days I peg her as flesh and blood, a thief sizing up a mark for later. At times I suspect she was something utterly different, a presence lingering in that eerie realm where dreams bleed into the waking world. A figure who crossed my threshold and carried away the terror in her wake. In the dream, her face never appeared to me. I recalled just her silhouette from behind, her flowing hair, and later, on my porch, the glow of my phone screen illuminating her features. Perhaps that marked the moment she truly gained a face. Perhaps that's what shattered the recurring horror. Who can say? I've devoted years to dissecting it logically, searching for a reasonable account. Yet the reality eludes me. What I do know is this. For 3 full months, a nightmare plagued me with an intensity surpassing any waking ordeal I'd known. Then, in the dead of night, A young woman identical to that spectral vision arrived at my doorstep, borrowed my phone without dialing a single number, and vanished into the shadows. And since that night, she's never haunted my sleep again. If you're enduring some profound hardship, if your thoughts are assailing you with uncontrollable visions and dread, tread with caution. Guard what you allow entry. Watch what crosses your doorstep. For the boundary separating the phantoms in your mind from the one poised outside can be perilously faint. And once that divide fades, once the dread materializes in the flesh, you might emerge forever altered. I must be candid before sharing this tale. I'm no adherent to the supernatural. Never have been. I've always prided myself on rationality, seeking grounded reasons, relying on science and proof, rather than myths or old wives' tales. But the events in that remote Pennsylvania house upended everything I held true. I'm Poppy, and I'm here to explain why I'll never return to that place, despite it still bearing my name on the deed. This unfolded roughly 7 years back. I was 26 then, employed as a nurse in a modest local hospital, and eager to purchase my inaugural property. In Pennsylvania's countryside, bargains abound for those open to renovating a diamond in the rough. After scanning options for months, I found a foreclosed gem that bordered on unbelievable, a 3-bedroom farmhouse on 5 acres, priced under $40,000. The images revealed an aging but solid build, boasting authentic hardwood flooring and a rugged stone hearth. It required updates, no doubt, but challenges I figured were conquerable. I reached out to the agent, Linda, an expert in repossessions and probate auctions. She seemed reluctant when I showed enthusiasm for the listing. The place had languished unsold for more than 2 years, she explained, with several prospective buyers submitting bids only to withdraw prior to finalizing. Probing further, I got only nebulous replies about structural concerns and loan complications. That ought to have signaled trouble, but youth and ambition clouded my judgment, and the bargain proved irresistible. We arranged a viewing for a crisp Saturday in early October. The site lay about 15 miles beyond the tiny hamlet of Emmonton, along a twisting gravel lane flanked by heavy timber. The grounds felt secluded, hemmed in by dense woodland on 3 flanks, with a wild meadow unfurling at the rear. As our car approached, it struck me as forlorn and forsaken, as if yearning for revival. Linda turned the key in the front lock and we entered. The atmosphere hung heavy and chill, carrying that signature aroma of aged homes, dust mingled with rot, and an elusive undertone I couldn't pinpoint. The space stood bare, devoid of furnishings or traces of life, yet its framework commanded respect. Soaring ceilings, raw timber rafters, a commanding stone fireplace anchoring the parlor. I toured every space, jotting observations, estimating repair expenses in my head. It all felt feasible right up to the upper level. 3 vacant chambers awaited above, save for the central one. Its door hung partially open. As I nudged it wider, a sudden chill enveloped me. The air there plunged noticeably cooler than elsewhere, cool to the point my breath fogged visibly. Linda sensed it as well, muttering about shoddy ceiling and urging haste. Curiosity pulled me onward, though. I ventured to the room's heart and surveyed it, Faded floral paper clung to the walls, curling away in spots, and the planks groaned beneath my steps. Then, my gaze caught an anomaly. The wardrobe was fastened with nails, not merely secured but barricaded. Roughly a dozen sturdy fasteners pierced the jamb and panel, locking it tight. I questioned Linda, who claimed ignorance. The sale was as is, and no detailed assessment had come her way. I wish I'd just turned and left that moment, but instead, I put in a bid. The bank approved it in just 2 days, and 3 weeks on, I became the proud owner of a home I'd glimpsed only once. I settled in on a chilly November morning. I'd brought on a contractor for the big fixes, like the roof and pipes, but I figured I'd tackle plenty of the finishing touches solo. I dove into the ground level first, peeling away faded wallpaper, smoothing down the floors, and slapping fresh coats on the walls. It was grueling labor, yet deeply rewarding. For those initial weeks, all felt normal. Still, I kept delaying the upstairs, especially that central bedroom. Whenever I considered heading up, an odd aversion gripped me, a weight pressing on my chest that defied reason. At last, roughly a month in, I pushed myself to confront it. I hauled a crowbar to the upper level and began wrenching out the nails from the closet door. It dragged on for more than an hour. Whoever had nailed it shut had meant for it to remain that way for good. Once I yanked the door free, the reason hit me instantly. It wasn't a closet at all. Concealed behind was a tiny secret chamber, about 6 feet by 8 feet, windowless, with walls plastered in yellowed newsprint. Right in the middle sat an assortment of things that sent chills racing through me. A simple wooden table held scores of curiosities, jars brimming with mysterious fluids, some transparent, others thick and murky. Bundles of withered herbs bound by dark twine. Bones from animals laid out in precise shapes, a worn leather journal scrawled with illegible script in an unfamiliar tongue or alphabet. And snapshots. Faded black and white images of strangers, including kids, every face locked on the lens with looks shifting from terror to quiet defeat. I retreated from there in a flash. I avoided touching a single item. No snaps on my phone. I simply shut the door, headed down, and planted myself on the porch out front, grappling with the sight. Every gut feeling screamed to reach out, to the cops, the old owner, somebody who might make sense of it. But it was a foreclosure. The last resident had vanished ages ago, leaving no trail. That evening, the footfalls echoed for the first time. I was in bed, rationalizing the discovery as mere traces of an eccentric pastime, nothing dark when they began. Methodical, unhurried steps echoing across the place. They kicked off in the living room below, wandered to the kitchen, along the hall, then climbed the stairs. I stayed rigid, ears straining as they hit the landing and halted right beyond my bedroom. A silhouette of souls appeared in the sliver under the door. Then, after ages, they shifted off, down the corridor, halting at the middle bedroom's entrance. Sleep evaded me entirely. I huddled in bed, lights blazing, alert for more. Yet the steps stayed silent. Dawn broke, and I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks, the house groaning in the chill, timbers shifting. But they returned the following night and the one beyond. Same routine each time. From below, roaming the rooms, ascending, lingering by my door, then on to the hidden space. I began digging into the house's past. At the county archives, I sifted through ownership records, uncovering something profoundly unsettling. Over 40 years, it had switched owners 11 times. Most folks had stuck around just a year or two before dumping or ditching it. 3 residents perished on the premises, one via heart failure, another by self-harm, the third in vague, unresolved fashion. The latest foreclosure stemmed from the prior inhabitant bolting without a word and letting the loan lapse. I tracked down a neighborhood expert, a senior fellow called Mr. Brennan, who'd spent his whole life nearby. As I outlined the address, his face shifted. He recognized it well. Word had spread about its notoriety. Townsfolk steered clear, whispering of odd events and baffling fatalities stretching back generations. Back in the early 1900s, he'd explained, a lady had held the deed, dabbling in ancient rites, folk spells, and plant lore that neighbors eyed warily. She'd turned up deceased inside under shady conditions, and from then on, the site earned a mark as tainted. Curses weren't my thing. They aren't now. But the reality unfolding around me was impossible to dismiss. Night after night, the pacing persisted. Household items began shifting positions. A volume I'd set on the kitchen counter would turn up in the den by sunrise. Shut doors I'd latched stood ajar. The chill in that central bedroom intensified steadily. On even the mildest afternoons, the space felt icy, so frigid that ice crystals etched the panes. But the basement unsettled me most. I'd steered clear of it entirely. The builder had given it a quick once-over after we settled in, declaring it solid but musty, requiring a sump pump to handle the moisture. One night, following yet another restless evening, I resolved to face the disturbances head-on. I wanted to check for any overlooked secrets in the place. Snatching a torch, I descended into the basement. The steps, ancient and timber, creaked loudly as I stepped on them. Down below, it was raw and incomplete. Rough stone walls enclosing a simple earthen ground. Tucked in the distant corner, concealed somewhat by a pile of weathered boxes, there was another entrance. Unlike the others, this door wasn't fastened. It simply stood ajar. Pushing it aside revealed a slim tunnel leading to a hidden chamber, likely an old root cellar or pantry long-walled away. Within lay additional items, more vessels, more skeletal remains, and one more thing. A broad ring sketched into the soil with what appeared to be soot or cinders, encircled by etched markings in the earth. I fled the basement and never returned. Reaching out to a nearby clergyman, I described my discovery and requested he purify the home. He consented with hesitation, then roamed the grounds for about an hour, murmuring prayers and dashing sacred water. He sensed an entity lingering there, one unwilling to depart. He suggested I think about putting the place on the market, warning that certain spots harbor an evil too stubborn to eradicate. I attempted to endure it. I pushed aside the pacing sounds, the biting frost, the shifting belongings. Yet after half a year, it overwhelmed me. Sleep evaded me. Food lost its appeal. Dread gripped me nightly as I lay alert, hearing those steps traverse the house, pause outside my threshold, then proceed to that chamber. I vacated the premises. Securing a lease in the nearby borough, I abandoned the dwelling to emptiness. I've attempted sales several times, but every prospective purchaser who inspected it withdrew. A few wouldn't venture upstairs at all. Others felt nauseous or on edge right upon crossing the threshold. The structure remains vacant along that remote gravel lane. Ownership clings to me since no takers emerge. Occasionally, passing by car, I spot illumination upstairs, despite the power being cut off. Silhouettes shift beyond the glass, and I'm utterly convinced that the force within persists, biding its time, retracing those nightly strides without cease. The prior inhabitants' actions elude me. The purpose of those artifacts or the significance of the runes escapes me. But I recognize that some locales are inherently tainted. Some bear a shadow that permeates the structure and defies expulsion. That abode, the accursed tract in rural Pennsylvania, stands as such. Should you encounter a bargain property that raises doubts, where former dwellers vanished inexplicably or townsfolk clam up about it, heed the signal. Avoid my error. For crossing that boundary, unfastening barriers intended to remain secure could unleash a specter to torment you eternally. I relocated to Minersville in Schuylkill County, seeking tranquility. At 32, exhausted from a decade in Philadelphia's corporate finance grind, I craved a more languid existence. The quaint settlement fit the bill, scarcely 4,000 souls, serene avenues flanked by aged Victorian homes, the sort of spot where acquaintances abound. Or so I assumed. I'm Arthur, and my revelations on Elm Street shattered my illusions of rural serenity. I leased a unassuming 2-level abode on the town's outskirts, budget-friendly and close enough to stroll to the central drag. The proprietor assured me the area was peaceful, inhabited chiefly by retirees who minded their own affairs, ideal for fleeing urban frenzy. I took possession on a balmy June Saturday, and soon after settling, I encountered my adjacent dweller. Mrs. Kowalski was her name, pushing 80 perhaps, a petite figure with gray locks severely knotted and piercing azure gaze that absorbed all details. Her residence abutted mine, a pristine Victorian draped in lace at each sill, and boasting a rose garden she nurtured with devotion. She presented herself the next day, offering a tray of fresh pierogi and a genial grin that instantly soothed my nerves, extending a cordial neighborhood hello. In the ensuing days, our exchanges grew companionable. She'd greet me with a wave from her garden each morning as I headed off to work, and every now and then she'd enlist my help hauling groceries from her car. We'd exchange words about the weather or neighborhood happenings. She came across as the perfect, kind-hearted old lady next door, the sort who captured all the cozy essence of living in a quiet town. There was nothing to make me think otherwise, at least initially. The initial oddity that caught my eye involved her guests. Folks would show up at Mrs. Kowalski's place during unusual times, always deep into the night, typically from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Being a light sleeper, the slam of car doors would jolt me awake. I'd peer from my bedroom window to spot cars easing into her driveway. Occasionally vans, other times sedans, but always with lights dimmed. Individuals would step out, enter the house, and depart after just 20 or 30 minutes. This routine played out 2 or 3 evenings, weekly. It just didn't add up for a woman of her years to host so many nocturnal callers. One morning, as she tended her roses, I brought it up lightly, mentioning the sounds and probing her response. She gave a warm smile, explaining they were simply church friends on night shifts dropping in to see how she was doing. It made sense enough, so I let it go without a second thought. After all, she was an older lady on her own, who'd imagine foul play. Yet soon, more peculiarities emerged. During a sweltering late July night, I rose around 1 a.m. for a glass of water in the kitchen. That window overlooked the edge of her property. While at the sink, I caught sight of activity. A pair of men were transporting an object from her rear entrance to a van stationed in the alley separating our homes. It was shrouded in what appeared to be canvas or thick cloth, elongated and cumbersome about the dimensions of a coiled rug. They hustled it into the vehicle and sped off, keeping headlights dark until hitting the road. In the shadowy kitchen, I watched, a chill knotting in my gut. Their furtive haste and stealth screamed trouble. I attempted to brush it off. Perhaps she was giving away outdated furnishings or clearing out clutter. But the midnight timing, the absence of lights, the rushed, covert motions, it gnawed at me. I grew more vigilant. I started logging the arriving and departing cars, jotting license plates, time stamps, and details on the folks I observed. They were mostly males, spanning different ages from youthful to middle years. Visits were brief, and they invariably exited with loads, sacks, crates, or those canvas-enveloped packages. Then there was the odor wafting from her yard, one I hadn't registered earlier or had overlooked. Subtle yet unmistakable, it carried a sharp biting tang like scorched plastic blended with a harsh chemical note. It peaked during those late-hour arrivals. In August one night, as I hauled garbage out near 10 p.m., voices drifted from her rear yard. Against my better judgment, my inquisitiveness won out. I crept along my house's side and peeked across the dividing fence. Her back entrance stood ajar, revealing the basement stairs. A glow emanated from within, accompanied by subdued, tense murmurs from at least 3 or 4 individuals. Then came another sound, weeping. Faint stifled sobs seeming to rise from beneath the floor. A wave of dread hit me. I retreated from the barrier as silently as possible and slipped indoors. I secured the locks and hunkered in the dim living room, grappling with the echoes in my mind. Weeping. It didn't resemble Mrs. Kowalski's voice, more like a younger person's, laced with fear. I convinced myself it was nothing, perhaps visiting grandkids being fussy, no cause for alarm. Still, layered atop the nocturnal traffic, the shrouded loads, and that stench, the sobs cast a far more ominous shadow. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept vigil by the window, eyes on her home. At about 2 a.m., a van arrived. 2 guys emerged, headed in, and after 15 minutes departed bearing another canvas-swathed item. This time, no doubt, lingered. Those packages held no chairs or tables. The manner of transport, the balance, the delicacy, pointed to something far more sinister. Come morning, I dialed the authorities. I shared my worries over the senior citizen nearby. Irregular nighttime traffic, peculiar scents, and cries that hinted at distress. The dispatcher noted my details and promised an investigation. They inquired whether I'd witnessed any outright crimes, like narcotics or arms. I explained to him, quote 5. He expressed his gratitude and mentioned they'd ramp up surveillance around there. 2 days afterward, another cop showed up at my doorstep. He probed deeply into my observations, the arrival times of the cars, the appearances of the individuals, even the license plates. I handed over all the notes I'd jotted down. He kept the details of their probe under wraps, but his sharp intensity during the interrogation signaled this was no small matter. He urged me to remain indoors after dark, secure my locks, and dial them right away if anything else struck me as off. Sleep evaded me for the following week. Those late-night callers persisted at Mrs. Kowalski's place, and I continued logging every detail. I snapped pictures of the vehicles, noted the hours, and made sure to remain hidden. The fear gnawed at me that she'd spot my surveillance or uncover my tip to the authorities. Then, one evening, it all exploded into chaos. It was a Thursday, shortly past midnight. The usual rumble of a car entering her drive caught my ear. But this wasn't some ordinary van or coupe. It was a police wagon, trailed by 3 plain sedans. From my shadowed bedroom window, I observed as lawmen encircled the property. They rapped on the entrance, and upon her response, they forced their way in. Soon, reinforcements poured in. Beams from flashlights darted across her home, accompanied by subdued yells. Next, they escorted folks outside, mostly young women, around 5 or 6, draped in coverings, guided toward ambulances that had pulled up quietly, lights off. They took Mrs. Kowalski into custody. I saw them cuff her wrists and usher her into a squad car. She appeared diminished and fragile, far removed from the horror she'd proven to be. Federal operatives combed through the residence for hours, hauling away crates of proof, laptops, and paperwork. Yellow tape cordoned off the site, and over the ensuing days, our block buzzed with police cruisers and media trucks. The complete picture emerged through media reports and follow-up chats with detectives. For more than 10 years, Mrs. Kowalski had orchestrated a human smuggling ring from her cellar. She linked into a vast syndicate stretching across several states, leveraging her facade as a benign senior to dodge any scrutiny. Her underground space had been rigged into makeshift detention areas, basic yet functional, for holding captives prior to relocation. Those sobs I'd overheard were genuine. The wrapped figures carted away were the sufferers, sedated and bound to stifle any bids for freedom or outcries. The probe exposed that various locals had sensed or known of the atrocities, but chosen silence, driven by terror or evolvement. The nocturnal arrivals included purchasers, smugglers, and muscle from the chain, handling deals, while Mrs. Kowalski, the kindly retiree, famed for her floral beds and pierogies, anchored the operation. I gave evidence during her hearing. Regret never crossed her face. In the court, she maintained that serene, affable demeanor from my welcome to the block, as though she were at a parish gathering instead of staring down a lifetime behind bars. The jury found her guilty on counts like human trafficking, abduction, and plotting. She'll spend her final days incarcerated. I left Minersville less than a month after her capture. Staying was impossible. Passing that dwelling daily, aware of the horrors concealed within, proved unbearable. The whole community seemed poisoned, marred by the revelation of such depravity thriving openly for years. Folks around there avoid the topic still. They yearn to bury it, push forward, act like it was a lone aberration. But it wasn't. The inquiry traced ties to further sites, broader webs, and parallel schemes in neighboring areas. The ordeal still fuels my bad dreams. I relive that evening of basement wails, and in the vision, I ignore it all. I simply retreat indoors. The weeping echoes on. I jolt awake, soaked and racing pulse, tormented by the thought that without my alert to the cops, without overriding my doubts as mere anxiety, those souls might linger in captivity below. Spot something odd? Speak up. That old saying may sound worn, but it holds. Never brush off your gut just because the person appears innocuous, or you'd rather avoid stirring issues. Darkness doesn't always match the stereotypes. It can masquerade as a charming grandma tending her blooms. It can lurk openly in serene suburbs where neighbors greet like family. Often the sole barrier between the suffering and liberation is one observer ready to notice and respond. Mrs. Kowalski's out of the picture. Yet the syndicate she fueled endures. Human trafficking occurs in quiet rural communities throughout Pennsylvania and the rest of the nation, concealed in everyday spots where you'd least expect it. Remain alert. Follow your gut feelings. And if anything seems off, don't brush it aside. You could be the sole observer brave enough to face what others choose to overlook. I'm Daisy, and my tale kicks off on a typical August night back in 1987. What came next was anything but normal. I'd recently hit 17, the baby of a 4-kid household, raised on a modest farm in Bird in Hand, a hamlet tucked along the fringes of Lancaster County's vast mosaic of cornfields and streams. Summers in Pennsylvania bring sticky air and lush overgrowth. Even after dark, the fields hum with unseen activity. The lanes, dusty and twisting amid hedges, plunge into total darkness once night falls. I'd always felt safe there, anchored by daily rhythms, dawn tasks, homework on the veranda, shared meals with the family, and lengthy strolls amid the corn stalks on our property. Our old farmhouse sat off the 2-lane highway, sheltered by maples and towering oaks. The sort of dwelling that had endured countless seasons of downpours and freezes across generations. Dad tended to the cattle and moonlighted as a mechanic nearby. Mom tended her vegetable patch and whipped up fresh bread every Friday. Life there was serene and steady, the kind of spot where real trouble never seemed possible. That fateful evening, after pitching in with Mom to wrap up the sweet corn picking, I wandered the farm with my brother. The atmosphere hung heavy with fading summer warmth and the low growl of approaching thunder. We spotted fireflies dancing above the haystacks by the creek, swapping tails like on any routine night. Right after dusk, my brother returned home for some lemonade. I hung back, scuffing my boots through the moist turf toward the tree line marking the adjacent land. I craved one final glimpse of the heavens. Swift clouds raced by, with stars blinking on and off. As I pivoted to leave, I noticed my laces had come undone, so I crouched down to retie them. That's my final sharp recollection. Hunkered in the twilight-draped lawn, tuned to the chirp of bugs and far-off croaks from frogs. What happened next, I learned from others' accounts, or stitched together amid the thick quiet of my own endurance. My family later shared that just 10 minutes elapsed before they realized I was missing. My brother figured I'd trail right after him. When he checked with Dad about whether I'd arrived inside, the answer was no. Mom stepped onto the porch and shouted my name, her call bouncing across the fields. With no reply, Dad snatched a flashlight and launched a hunt, his footsteps thudding along the yielding soil amid the bean and squash rows, his yells growing urgent as silence met each one. In under 30 minutes, the property teemed with neighbors and county deputies. Vehicles lined the extended drive, kitchen lights flaring from radios and lamps held in hands. Groups of men combed the cornfields in formation, hollering my name and sweeping their lights into every dip and hollow. The night stretched into the wee hours, yet I remained vanished. They discovered my boots discarded close to the tree line, positioned neatly as though I'd slipped them off in a swift instant, and padded shoeless into the forest. No further clues, no footprints, no trampled foliage, not a single snapped branch, simply my boots aligned, and beyond that, emptiness. The formal hunt kicked off at dawn the following day. Lancaster County brims with folks rooted deeply in the soil, Amish, Mennonites, and veteran growers who've stoically faced hardships and tempests. They arrived equipped with steeds and hounds, methodically covering plot after plot, rapping on doors, probing the minor waterways, and probing the gullies. Cop choppers droned above, circling slowly over the varied landscape. My parents huddled around our kitchen table amid charts, with phones buzzing nonstop. As days dragged on, that inner certainty that I'd simply emerge from the thicket, grimy and famished but intact, started to wane. Local papers covered my vanishing in stark, measured terms, teen from area unaccounted for. Posters with my image spread across utility poles and post boxes lining Route 340. My school photo, serious and straight-faced, stared from notice boards and filling stations throughout the region. Our home transformed into the operations base. Mom brewed pots of coffee and fixed subs for anyone who might have caught a last sight of me. Dad handed out tasks to helpers and patrolled the edges of our acreage through sleepless nights, his lantern swaying. He fired off more desperate inquiries than imaginable, grilling every local, his resolve hardening into a somber focus with each dead end. After 7 days yielded 0 leads, speculation started to spread. The county sheriff figured I'd bolted after a fight with my sibling, even though nobody in the family remembered any such blow-up. Newspapers buzzed about a possible stalker. TV reports tossed around ideas like an unintended drowning or an abduction by a transient on the interstate. My folks wouldn't accept any of those notions. All they craved was their girl home safe. They'd have given up everything to wipe away those missing hours. Time crawled by in the weeks that followed. Relatives and neighbors dropped off dishes of casserole and baked goods, aiming to ease the void that appetite might occasionally bridge over sorrow. A medium from Philly turned up one day, vowing to track me down as she roamed the meadows with divining rods, gesturing toward barren brush before slipping away just as abruptly. Tiny communities brim with gossip. Some folks murmured grim tales, others spun weighty legends. Now and then my mom would catch the hoot of an owl and break into tears, convinced it signaled doom, like some force in the darkness was attempting to communicate. Come fall, the hunt tapered off. My loved ones struggled even to discuss potential scenarios. That prolonged, quiet devastation lingered into the chilly season, until daily routines forced them onward. My brother headed back to classes. Dad resumed his job. Mom cared for her plants with robotic resolve, steering clear of my bedroom and leaving my belongings untouched until the puzzle got solved. This is the point where the terror intensifies, and the account veers from harsh truth into the uncanny. My vanishing didn't wrap up with a corpse or an admission. It offered no resolution or straightforward explanations. Rather, in the years ahead, eerie events started unfolding on our land. It began with the glow. During the final days of March the next year, both my mom and brother reported spotting a faint sphere floating by the edge of the woods at twilight, right around where they'd discovered my shoes. It lingered only briefly to draw their eyes, pulsing with an eerie glow amid the thick fog, before dissolving into the willow grove. They kept an eye out for repeats, wondering if it was merely a far-off farm light or a gleam from a vehicle on the road. Yet it always showed up in that exact spot and dimmed out before they got close. Folks nearby mentioned sightings, too. It popped up a couple or few times weekly at points, or went silent for months. Soon it turned into neighborhood lore, that ghostly gleam at Daisy's spot, standing for whatever force had claimed me. Then there was the calling. On certain evenings after the clock struck 12, my dad would jolt awake to his name spoken from beyond the veranda. Invariably in my tone, steady and calm, echoing his name like I was right there by the mesh entrance. He'd leap from bed, dash out with a beam from his torch, rousing my brother and mom along the way. Each instance revealed zilch. Only the breeze sweeping across the pastures, fields weighed down by slumber, insects chirping like a faulty timer. In area tales, a vanished individual's whisper marks a presence, a specter, a remnant from a spirit adrift in limbo. My household had dismissed such notions before, but after endless episodes, their doubt eroded, replaced by a cautious wonder, a fear honed by the feeling that an entity sought connection. The final indicator proved hardest to brush off. Each year, on the date, I went missing. For 3 straight occasions, an unseen hand or presence would deposit a lone wild bloom on the stoop. Always a fresh blue aster, gathered not from the tended plots, but from the wild patches by the willows. No message, no tracks, simply the blossom set dead center on the upper tread, catching the dawn's first rays on the deck. By the time high school graduation should have arrived for me, the investigation had gone stagnant. Cops quit picking up my parents' phone calls. Posters yellowed and tangled in highway brush like trash. Mom began journaling it all, notebooks crammed with every recollection, hint, or hypothesis she could summon. She connected with experts on unexplained abductions, poring over accounts of bizarre vanishings in the countryside of Pennsylvania, frantic for connections or insights. Her studies uncovered parallels, individuals who slipped from everyday security into nothingness, trailing anomalies that felt more otherworldly than unlawful. Orbs, murmurs, peculiar tokens on milestones like holidays or special days. A few narratives concluded with the absent one reappearing, confused and amnesiac, or spinning wild tales. Others trailed into silence. Mom recorded it meticulously, aiming to hand investigators a guide, striving to validate the oddities so frequently waved off as myth. Residents of Bird in Hand started invoking our ordeal as proof that the region held a mystic taint, that an invisible presence roamed the terrain, seizing the vulnerable. The stream, locals claimed, bore a curse. The forest pulsed with energy. Twilight winds might whisk the unwary off if vigilance slipped. As national interest waned and our tale faded into folklore, daily life continued unabated. After my parents relocated to a neighboring town for employment and emotional recovery, the farm exchanged owners once more. The newcomers, a long-time Lancaster couple by the name of Miller, at first brushed off the past events as mere tall tales. Yet their efforts to cultivate the land soon encountered a mounting array of minor, eerie disturbances. Animals vanished without trace by morning. Fences stood ajar for no apparent reason. Implements went missing or turned up inexplicably at the property's rugged perimeter, right where those boot marks had surfaced long before. One night, the Millers welcomed a regional expert, Mr. Grath, for an inspection of the grounds, accompanying his notebook packed with regional tales, other missing persons, odd glows, and a long-standing myth linked to the original settlers. He revealed how the 1800s brought a wave of baffling disappearances in the area, particularly among youthful farm hands and mill workers, mostly young women. Most cases ended unresolved, chalked up to elopements, mishaps, or attacks by drifters. Still, he pointed out recurring signs of reappearance, not the lost individuals, but related oddities. Dusk illuminations, whispers across the meadows, trinkets deposited as markers. The parallels to our own ordeal were uncanny, prompting the expert to propose an article for the community periodical on the lost daughters of Bird in Hand. My sibling, then attending university, declined involvement. Though hesitant yet inquisitive, my folks added a brief excerpt from my mother's diaries. Unexpectedly, the piece garnered far broader readership. The publication overflowed with correspondence from surrounding villages and farther afield in Lancaster County. Accounts poured in of comparable occurrences, including specific identities, timelines, and observations that aligned precisely with the peculiar chart my mother had compiled across the years. Overnight, dismissed local myths started resembling a burgeoning county-wide enigma. Briefly, investigators rolled in via vehicles and coaches, hunting clues that tied these local losses to some larger occurrence. Several hailed from academic institutions. That season, 2 advanced learners from Princeton showed up with bundles of observation logs and sound devices. Seeking permission from my relatives and the Millers, they pitched tents close to the willows to track luminous events and note weather variables. Mark and Lisa recorded shifting glows on most evenings. Notably, these displays repeated annually at the identical site, drifting over the untamed blooms and persisting 3 to 4 minutes prior to dissolving into haze. Their recording gear detected subtle yet recognizable human tones, including those akin to teenage females and deeper, vaguer murmurs. Though no distinct phrases emerged, each carried a haunting chill that rendered playback sessions intensely draining. During their final evening, Lisa spotted what she termed a silhouette stepping from the woodland. Detailing it to my mom and sibling, She recounted viewing via infrared a softly radiant shape resembling a teenage girl in pale attire. Upon arriving at the spot of my former boot discovery, the form halted, extended an arm in a gesture like a farewell wave, then scattered on a sudden breeze. Mark examined the video and confirmed her account, noting that thermal imaging showed a roughly 7 degrees temperature drop in the moments around the appearance. Upon delivering the results to their school's math and tech divisions for scrutiny, tests revealed no unusual magnetic influences, artificial light origins, or regional fauna and weather patterns to account for their records. Even with the evidence, both scholars faced heavy doubt and rejection when attempting formal presentations among colleagues. Their work gradually sank into the obscure realm of unexplained events, shelved alongside yarns of phantom vessels, elusive beasts, and the shadowy fringes of countryside lore. The Millers ultimately departed, shaken by the happenings and unable to sustain the farm's viability. The land traded owners yet again, gradually succumbing to disrepair. Over the ensuing years, fresh accounts emerged across Lancaster County, youngsters and wayfarers vanishing with scant clues, invariably trailed by the familiar sequence of glows, murmurs, and mementos. Authorities stuck to labels like fugitives, spur-of-the-moment offenses, or misfortunes. But among those immersed in the mythos, the narratives multiplied in scope and intricacy. My household, now rooted in another district, discovered a serene resolution through recounting our experiences, both openly and through personal exchanges with kindred families. My mom continued filling 2 additional journals, recording each anniversary and every sighting of the blue aster whenever the light shimmered by the willow. What's left isn't so much about resolution as transformation, a tale expanding as increasing numbers of folks confess to encountering that threshold where the familiar world brushes against the mysterious. We exist in an era craving justifications, logical solutions, proof to contain the untamed elements lurking at the fringes of our secure daily lives. Yet my account, much like those preceding and following it, defies any tidy conclusion. I didn't just disappear. I merged into the terrain, a twist in the intertwined chronicle of Lancaster County and its charts of grief. Folks still assemble annually beneath the willow trees, placing blue asters on my family's former porch and whispering my name at twilight, hoping the glow will respond. Some remain skeptics, and that's okay. For believers, my boots stay right where they were discovered. They serve as both caution and tribute, an indicator that the earth harbors mysteries, and those enigmas pulse with life beyond dread or yearning. If you head to bird in hand, don't brush off the tails. Stroll the meadow at a leisurely pace. Notice the spots where the illumination alters and the atmosphere turns abruptly chilly. Mention those who've gone missing with respect, and have faith that within the blend of recollection and myth, the absent don't fully fade. They observe, lingering, born in the murmurs that resound across the meadows at evening, in the blooms that emerge inexplicably, and in the tracks that occasionally captivate a whole community's focus, gripping them with prospects no solace can fully erase. Certain individuals maintain a logical explanation lurks somewhere. A driver in a vehicle cruising by. Intricate hoaxes. One fluke stacked on another, but the truth lingers. Under the orderly realm, a shadow endures, threaded through the meadows and streams of Lancaster County. I'm Daisy. My boots endure. My narrative persists. And annually, the blue aster flourishes where darkness descends most intensely along the border of our kin's anguish. I'm Jacob, and I spent 12 years as a police officer in Wyoming, a tiny settlement nestled amid the hills of Bradford County in northern Pennsylvania. Folks often picture rural policing as aiding elderly women with street crossings, dispersing teen gatherings, and issuing tickets for speeding. Elements of that rang true, no doubt. Yet they overlook how rural communities conceal shadows far more effectively than urban ones. In metropolis areas, offenses are out in the open, logged, and publicized. In fading hamlets like ours, confidences sink into oblivion, and those in the know seal their lips. The account I'm sharing explains why I abandoned policing altogether and why I'll never return to Wyoming. I signed on at 22 straight from the academy, brimming with zeal to effect change. Wyoming housed around 1,300 souls, mainly elderly ranchers and mill hands whose offspring had fled to larger metropolises long ago. Our unit was modest, just 6 cops, chief included. We managed it all, from family quarrels to sporadic drunk driving cases. The routine felt steady, foreseeable. For those initial years, I believed I was contributing positively. The derelict quarry lay roughly 3 miles beyond town, along a dirt path twisting through thick woods. It operated until the mid-1970s, when its corporate owner folded and abandoned the spot to ruin. The excavation formed a vast crater in the slope, brimming with murky, motionless water that locals claimed plunged over 100 feet in spots. The vicinity was strewn with corroded machinery, tumbled structures, and ignored no-entry warnings. Teens ventured there for booze and dips, heedless of risks. Periodically, a drowning or injury occurred, pulling us in for response. Across the decades, fatalities piled up at the quarry. Far too many. Most got classified as unintended submersion or mishaps. Youth leaping into the opaque depths and failing to emerge. Their remains hauled out after days, swollen and ashen. Others, however, deviated from that mold. In 2003, Thomas Kellerman turned up at the pit's base, wrists tied behind him. Authorities deemed it self-inflicted. In 2007, Sarah Voss vanished after informing relatives of a planned trek. Her vehicle sat near the quarry's gateway, yet her corpse never surfaced. In 2011, a wandering vagrant was located deceased by the waterline, bearing a head wound from bludgeoning. The then chief labeled it a mishap. Claimed a fall onto the stones did it. As a newcomer, I accepted those verdicts without challenge. Youthful and green, I relied on my colleagues. But with time, discrepancies emerged for me. Investigations into fatalities at the quarry wrapped up fast, often in just a few days, involving little real scrutiny. Autopsies got skipped or done halfway. Potential witnesses weren't questioned in depth. Evidence collection was sloppy at best, and every time I probed further, I got shut down, told the matters were settled, no point squandering police resources. Things only shifted for me in 2019 when I began poking around independently. One afternoon, a local resident, Mrs. Holbrook, showed up at the station trembling and requested to talk with an officer regarding her son. He'd perished at the quarry back in 1998, labeled an accidental drowning on paper, though she'd always doubted that verdict. She explained how her boy had a deep fear of water, wouldn't have dreamed of swimming, and that evening he'd mentioned heading out to meet someone over a potential job. For more than 2 decades, she'd been seeking answers, but no one on the force had ever given her the time of day. Despite knowing better, I recorded her account anyway, even without clearance to revisit such an ancient case. Digging into the archives, I located her son's dossier. The probe had been superficial, to put it mildly. No witness accounts, no chase down on that job rendezvous he'd referenced, no tox screen, merely a short write-up from the first responder noting the body's retrieval from the quarry and deeming it an apparent mishap. The file sealed in under 2 days flat. That became my initial pull from the stacks. In the following weeks, I sifted through all quarry-related deaths stretching back to the 1980s, 17 altogether. 17 lives lost across 40 years, each classified as accidental or unresolved, each shut down after bare-bones checks. The deeper I delved, the more off it seemed. Patterns emerged upon closer inspection, several bodies with wrists tied or wounds that didn't match drowning, overlooked witnesses, proof that vanished or never made the logs. And one recurring figure in the documents, Officer Dale Mercer, a department veteran of over 30 years, now the deputy chief. I began inquiring discreetly around town, steering clear of alerting colleagues. I chatted with victims' relatives, lifelong Wyoming locals, and seasoned residents who recalled the quarry's active days. The revelations chilled me to the core. Whispers circulated, tales folks hesitated to voice, about the site serving purposes far removed from quarrying. Smuggling rings in the 70s and 80s, narcotics trafficking through the region, underground betting, even whispers of mobsters from Scranton and Binghamton disposing of corpses there. Those who learned sensitive details or pried too hard tended to wind up submerged in that pit. A retired quarry hand by the name of Eugene shared that he'd witnessed unspeakable events years ago, though he wouldn't elaborate. He warned that the operating firm had connections to untouchable types, and post-closure, those elements lingered, merely adapting the location for fresh schemes. He urged me to abandon my probe, insisting I was risking my life and that the network extended well past the sheriff's office. I should have heeded him, but by that point I was in too far, utterly persuaded I could unearth the long-buried secrets. I began compiling a record of it all, duplicating files, taping conversations, snapping pics of the quarry grounds. I spotted untended spots by the shoreline where soil appeared freshly churned, likely spots for rushed burials under stones and earth. I alerted state troopers in hopes they'd assume control, but my submissions drew silence. I then connected with a Harrisburg reporter focused on exposés, and she committed to exploring the matter. That's when the threats kicked in. At first, they were understated. My cruiser got keyed and tires punctured while stationed at my place. Then came eerie late-night calls, anonymous, just heavy breathing on the line. My home got ransacked during my shift, nothing taken, but my documents rifled through. Clearly someone was signaling they had eyes on me, aware of my pursuits. I cornered Officer Mercer outright, grilling him on the cases and the rush to close them sans due diligence. His response hit like ice. No evasion, just a steely gaze as he said, "Back off the digging, Jacob. This town's got forces outweighing you, outstripping the whole force. Push harder, and you'll join the rest at the quarry's depths. Anyone who couldn't stay in their lane." I informed the chief about the threat, expecting him to step in, pull Mercer off the force, and start an internal probe. But instead, he summoned me to his office and announced I was going on paid leave while awaiting a mental health assessment. He claimed the pressure had gotten to me, that I was imagining plots that didn't exist, and that my actions were alarming my fellow officers. They demanded my badge and gun, barring me from the precinct until a shrink endorsed by the department gave me the all clear. I understood the game. They were sidelining me, cutting me off, ensuring I couldn't pursue the matter further. That day, I walked out of the station facing a stark dilemma. Quit the chase to save my career or push on and gamble it all. I picked the riskier path. I connected with the reporter, handing over my complete dossier, files, witness statements, snapshots. She vowed to publish the exposé, revealing the long-hidden scandals in Wyoming. 2 days on, she was gone. A crash on Route 6. Her car veered off into a tree. State troopers called it a mishap, blaming high speed and bad weather. But I saw through it. No way was that random. They'd silenced her, same as every other soul who dared uncover the facts. That week, I fled Weil Singh. No goodbyes, no hints on my destination. I just loaded up and headed south, maximizing the miles from that cursed place. For a while, I crashed with a buddy in Maryland, jumpy as hell, always glancing back, certain the killers would track me down next. They never did. Probably assumed I'd been cowed into silence, too terrified to speak up again. And they weren't wrong. I steered clear of the press, skipped the FBI and the AG's team. I vanished, reinvented myself in another state with a fresh identity, and fought to bury the memories. Forgetting's impossible, though. Those victims' faces haunt my dreams, the ones whose files got shelved without real answers. The relatives fed nothing but deception. The whistleblowers who paid with their lives. Wyalusing persists. The quarry lingers, brimming with murky depths and concealed horrors. Mercer hung up his badge a few years back. The chief still calls the shots. The killings have tapered off, or perhaps they're just slicker at concealment now. Who knows? One thing's clear. Certain corners of America operate beyond the law, where rot seeps into every layer of authority and truth-telling can end in a coffin. If you're ever in some backwater burg and the vibe feels off, if probes fizzle prematurely, if folks clam up in fear, don't chalk it up to sloppiness or apathy. It could run far deeper. Whole towns might collude to bury atrocities stretching back generations. And those sworn to safeguard you? They might be the real threat. I wore the badge once, swore to uphold justice. Yet I discovered some truths are lethal to unearth, and survival sometimes demands turning tail and erasing the past. Wising's quarry cradles remains that won't surface, tales that stay unspoken, shadows that defy the sun. And I carry the weight of knowing I couldn't halt it, that I let down the dead and their loved ones, that the guilty remain free, entrenched, dumping their guilt into that icy void. My name is Millie, and I must share the tale of the church woven into my family's legacy and the nightmare entombed below it. This unfolds in a quiet Pennsylvania village I'll leave unnamed, not out of worry for lawsuits, but because its residents prefer amnesia. Certain truths get shielded by collectives who thrive on hush. I spent my childhood attending services at St. Matthias's Chapel, an elegant 1887 stone edifice erected by the town's pioneers. Perched on a ridge above the central road, it was framed by venerable oaks and a modest graveyard holding the bones of countless locals. The structure mesmerized with its vibrant stained glass biblical panels, groaning timber benches, and a grand organ that resonated through worship songs. It evoked a timeless bond, a sanctuary spanning eras. My grandfather shepherded that flock for more than 4 decades until his passing when I turned 16. He was reserved and solemn, a pillar of the parish, the go-to figure amid sorrow or turmoil. I cherish fond recollections of him, from those quiet hours in his study as he crafted his sermons, to the times I assisted my grandmother with arranging church gatherings and the annual Christmas pageants. He embodied pure kindness, a figure whose entire existence revolved around aiding those around him. Following his death in 2015, my grandmother requested my help in sifting through his personal effects. She lacked the strength for the job, and my parents were tied up with their careers. The responsibility landed on my shoulders. At 23 years old then, employed as an educator in a neighboring town, I requested a week's leave to return home and lend a hand. Nearly everything I uncovered aligned with expectations. Volumes on theology, sermons penned in his meticulous script, snapshots of church gatherings across the years, and notes from congregants expressing gratitude for his counsel. Yet, tucked in the desk's lowest drawer under a pile of outdated hymnals, lay a leather-covered journal. Unlike his typical ledgers, this one appeared ancient, its cover cracked and frayed. Upon flipping it open, I noticed the script wasn't his. The interior brimmed with notations from the 1940s and 1950s, authored by a Reverend Calloway, whom I discovered had preceded my grandfather as pastor, starting in 1964. The content was unsettling. It detailed rites held in the church's lower level, assemblies of select local families engaging in what Calloway termed ancient customs. He recounted livestock offerings to guarantee bountiful crops, rites aligned with particular moon cycles, and the use of the sublevel as a conduit for primal energies that antedated Christian traditions. Though the wording stayed elusive, the undertones were unmistakable. This sanctuary, a beacon of belief and fellowship, had harbored shadowy deeds. I ought to have halted my reading right there, sealed the journal, restored it to its hiding spot, and departed. Instead, curiosity gripped me. I flipped onward, and the accounts sharpened in detail. Reverend Calloway named congregation members, influential clans that persisted in the area, folks whose descendants had shared classrooms with me. He explained how these traditions endured across lineages, how the church stood on terrain revered by early colonists, and how its foundation accommodated hidden functions. One passage from October 1953 chilled me to the core. Reverend Calloway recounted a ritual that faltered, a beast that didn't perish neatly, crimson fluid spattering the masonry in formations he deemed meaningful. He described interring the remnants under the subfloor to purify the area and bolster subsequent observances. Then came a line etched in my mind forever. The young ones fail to grasp our actions, yet someday they will. This settlement thrives on offerings, and offerings sustain it. I shut the journal and remained in my grandfather's workspace, fingers trembling, grappling with the revelations. Did my grandfather possess knowledge of this? Had he joined in or merely unearthed the record and concealed it, paralyzed by fear or entanglement to reveal the truth? Uncertainty overwhelmed me. Confronting my grandmother was impossible. Her fragility could shatter under the strain. My parents would dismiss it outright. Thus, I resolved to probe solo. One late night, certain the church stood vacant, I slipped inside with the key my grandmother retained from my grandfather's pastoral days. The structure loomed dim and chilly, illuminated solely by external street lights seeping through the colored panes. I descended to the undercroft via a slim timber portal beside the sanctuary, down groaning, precipitous steps. Nowadays, the space served as a repository, cluttered with faded holiday trimmings, splintered benches, and crates of hymnals. But, tucked in the remote angle, obscured by a heap of collapsible seats, a patch of flooring diverged from the surroundings. The slabs gleamed darker, imbued with long-infused discoloration. I shifted the seats and scrutinized it nearer. Etchings scarred the rock. Unfamiliar icons, eroded by ages yet discernible to the attentive eye. Pressing my palm there, an eerie chill emanated, distinct from the humid warmth pervading the rest of the chamber. That evening I fled the premises and devoted subsequent days to unearthing the locale's past, poring over vintage periodicals and municipal ledgers. The discoveries validated my deepest dreads. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, a string of fatalities gripped the community without resolution. Youngsters who vanished, wanderers who arrived and evaporated into obscurity. Residents of the area had perished under strange conditions, and several of those fatalities aligned with dates Reverend Calloway noted in his diary as key moments for ceremonies. I further discovered that the town's original settlers, the group that constructed the chapel and formed the settlement, hailed from parts of Europe where ancient customs and pagan traditions lingered well beyond Christianity's spread. They carried those traditions across the ocean, concealing them under a layer of propriety and handing them along through the family lines. The most chilling revelation hit me during a chat with Mrs. Brennan, a lifelong resident who was quite advanced in years. I eased into the discussion with broad inquiries about the chapel's background. She hesitated initially, but soon shared details that sent shivers through me. Back in her youth during the 1940s, she recalled her dad and fellow churchgoers heading up to the building after dark. They instructed her to remain indoors and mind her own business, and the following morning, an odd odor would waft from the hillside, like charred flesh mixed with an indefinable tang. She mentioned, too, that following intense downpours, skeletal remains would occasionally emerge from the ground just past the chapel, close to the graveyard's boundary. The community would discreetly cover them up again, dismissing them as displaced from ancient plots, though she harbored deeper doubts. According to her, those pioneer clans still dominated local affairs, holding seats on the council, running the shops, and ensuring uncomfortable tales remained suppressed. I challenged my grandmother using the diary. It ranked among the toughest talks I've endured. Tears streamed down her face, not from shock, but from the dread that I'd ever stumble upon it. She revealed that my grandfather unearthed the diary soon after taking the pulpit in 1964, that he'd pressed some veteran parishioners about it, and that they'd issued dire warnings. They cautioned that revealing the contents would lead to his downfall, tarnishing his name and barring him from future ministry roles. As a result, he stayed silent. He stashed the diary away, halted any further rites during his tenure, yet never brought the prior events to light. My grandmother pleaded with me to abandon the matter. She warned that those clans retained their influence, willing to go to extremes to safeguard their hidden past, and that digging deeper would endanger my safety. Yet I couldn't walk away. I reached out to an investigative reporter from a nearby metropolis, handing over photocopies of the diary entries and all my findings. He showed initial enthusiasm, even eagerness. He visited the place, spoke with locals, and snapped images of the chapel and its lower level. But after just a fortnight, he quit responding. When I eventually got through, he admitted shelving the piece, claiming his superior deemed it insufficiently verifiable for print. His voice trembled with fear, and he urged caution, mentioning that folks had been inquiring about my whereabouts and advising me to back off. I refused to quit. I approached the local council, insisting they dig up the spot behind the chapel and probe the sub-level. They turned me down, pointing to limited funds and absent proof. I escalated to state authorities, only to hear that absent tangible signs of wrongdoing, an antique diary alone wouldn't trigger a probe. It seemed I was yelling into emptiness, as if a collective effort worked to bury the facts. That's when the intimidation began. My vehicle got trashed. Menacing notes arrived by post, unseen warnings demanding I vacate and cease prying. An intruder rifled through my home, leaving everything intact but the intent obvious. Cease or suffer repercussions. I departed. I returned to urban life, swapped my contact details, and sought to sever ties with the settlement and its revelations. Still, the awareness torments me. I'm aware of the horrors concealed under that chapel. I realize corpses rest there, that ceremonies unfolded in that lower chamber across many years, and that the settlement's elite lineages erected their success on shadows and offerings. The chapel endures. Weekly gatherings persist on Sundays. Those ancestral groups maintain their grip on the community. The lower chamber, marked by shadowy marks and etched icons, sits undisturbed. Annually, post-storms, contacts from the region mention skeletal fragments appearing by the graveyard. And each time, the locals cover them over in silence, bypassing any scrutiny. Should you visit a secluded community where long-standing dynasties wield unbroken authority, where curiosity meets resistance and confidences are fiercely guarded, stay vigilant. Examine the underpinnings of their establishments, their places of worship, municipal buildings, and gathering halls. Often, what appears to be long-standing custom and legacy rests upon a much darker foundation, and those aware of the reality will go to extreme lengths to ensure it stays hidden. I'm Henry, and the account I'm sharing challenges every logical framework I've ever attempted to impose upon it. I've devoted years to unraveling the events of that chilly dawn in Lackawanna County. Despite crafting countless hypotheses and seeking advice from specialists, I invariably return to one unfathomable truth. Certain phenomena elude explanation, and some enigmas aren't intended for resolution. I'm an outdoorsman. I've pursued game through the woodlands of northeastern Pennsylvania starting at age 12, guided by my dad and granddad, who navigated these same forests for decades. I'm familiar with each path, every hilltop, and all the iced-over streams in the vicinity. I'm not one to scare easily or leap to otherworldly notions. I rely on concrete details, footprints, climate conditions, and wildlife habits. Yet the incident on February 14, 2011, upended all my views on what constitutes the real world. That season brought harsh winter weather. For weeks, mercury levels lingered near zero, with county lakes and pools encased in thick ice, some reaching almost 2 feet deep. I'd headed out at first light to inspect my snares along Chapman Lake's western bank. It's a modest waterway, roughly 6 miles from the closest settlement. Dawn was breaking, stretching shadows over the white blanketed terrain, my exhales visible like mist. Traversing the lake's southern side, I spotted a shadowy form trapped in the ice, about 20 feet offshore. Initially, I figured it was a downed limb or sizable junk frozen in place. But drawing nearer, I saw it wasn't wood at all. It was a corpse. A person's remains, impeccably maintained, locked upright in the ice, suggesting the individual had been on their feet as the water turned to solid. My immediate reaction was to alert authorities, but cell coverage was non-existent so far from civilization. I advanced carefully, pulse racing, and crouched on the frozen surface for a closer inspection. Spots of the ice were transparent, others opaque, yet I discerned sufficient to recognize this wasn't a fresh mishap in the water. The figure was a middle-aged male, clad in attire that seemed from another era. A brown wool blazer, crisp white shirt, somber pants, and custom-looking leather footwear. His eyelids were shut, expression serene, like he'd merely dozed off under the surface. The most astonishing aspect was the state of preservation. There was no rot, no swelling or staining typical of prolonged immersion. The flesh was ashen yet whole, traits sharply defined and identifiable. It resembled a snapshot of the instant after demise, sealed flawlessly in frost. I trekked back to my vehicle and headed to the closest ranger outpost to alert them. Soon after, officials and rescue teams flooded the site. They sealed the zone, deployed ice-sawing tools, and labored through the afternoon to free the remains. I lingered, providing my account to the probes, specifying the spot and my observations. The corpse went to the local coroner's facility for examination and ID. I figured that wrapped up my role, expecting officials to identify him, determine the cause, and contact kin. However, 2 days on, a call came from State Police Detective Sergeant Crawford requesting I visit for further inquiries. Upon reaching the precinct, He ushered me into a compact meeting space occupied by additional personnel, among them a skeletal specialist from the University of Pennsylvania and an FBI agent. They had me repeat the tale of my find in full, covering the site, the remains' state, and his garb. Next, they presented images from the post-mortem. That's when the situation turned profoundly odd. The coroner concluded hypothermia as the cause, probably from breaking through the ice without getting out. But the timeline of the fatality left all puzzled. From the remains' condition and intactness, the initial assessment pegged it to the last year, maybe mere months ago. Yet the outfit suggested otherwise. The attire, the suit, the footwear, the material, appeared to hail from the 1950s or the start of the 1960s. The design, the fabrics, and even the sewing techniques aligned perfectly with that period. Authorities checked dental records and fingerprints, aiming to pinpoint the victim via missing persons records. That's when the unbelievable occurred. The prints aligned with a fellow called Thomas Edward Larkin, reported vanished in January 2011, merely a month prior to my discovery of the remains. Thomas Larkin, a 63-year-old former accountant out of Scranton, had headed out for some fishing at Chapman Lake and failed to come back. His vehicle sat abandoned close to the boat ramp, yet searches turned up nothing, and efforts were halted after a few days because of hazardous ice. It ought to have been a simple case. A missing individual heads out fishing, plunges through the ice, and the corpse surfaces a month on. But one major issue arose. Thomas Larkin simply couldn't have donned outfits from the 1950s. He was an everyday guy in 2011, sporting current-day garb and piloting a 2007 Ford pickup. Still, the remains we extracted from the ice-sported retro outfits, untouched by production for more than half a century. The FBI operative, Special Agent Reeves, inquired whether I'd spotted anything odd at the lake that day. I replied that no. Only the figure encased in ice. She probed deeper, wondering about other items, snow disruptions, or clues to the outfit mismatch. Nothing like that. The area around the lake remained pristine, save for my tracks and those from a couple of deer that had wandered across the ice overnight. Dr. Callahan, the forensic anthropologist, noted that carbon testing and material examination verified the garments dated to the 1950s, probably made between 1952 and 1957. The wool underwent scrutiny, dye compositions were dissected, leaving zero question about its origin era. Nevertheless, the body's DNA irrefutably linked to Thomas Larkin, the recent missing person from just 30 days earlier. They urged me to keep quiet about the matter, pointing to the active probe and the necessity to safeguard evidence. I consented, despite the profound unease gripping me from the details. How does someone vanishing in 2011 end up in 60-year-old threads? From where did the garments originate? Did somebody outfit the corpse post-mortem? For what reason? And how did it stay in such flawless shape over so brief a span? In the ensuing months, I kept tabs on the probe as best I could, phoning Sergeant Crawford now and then for news. The hypotheses grew ever more outlandish. A few on the team floated that Larkin collected old-school apparel and had it on during his mishap on the ice. His kin shot that down fiercely, insisting he held no passion for relics, and had set off that morning in his standard angling outfit, up-to-date thermal overalls and a parka. Alternative ideas held that the corpse had lingered in the ice much longer than thought, implying it wasn't Larkin, but a 1950s figure whose genetic profile coincidentally synced. That notion crumbled under dental verification, which proved the match without question. The body's teeth aligned precisely with X-rays from Larkin's checkup 2 years before he went missing. Dr. Callahan put forth the most disturbing notion. She posited a time-related irregularity, some break in time's usual progression that let the remains occupy dual realities at once. She drew on fringe ideas from physics concerning time stretching and particle linking, proposing that harsh freezes and magnetic influences around lakes could spawn zones where time behaved erratically. She conceded it was all conjecture, devoid of backing, yet no alternative squared with the facts. The matter never got a formal resolution, though the inquiry faded into obscurity. The FBI stepped back, deeming no basis for their oversight. State troopers issued a concluding summary, deeming the demise accidental submersion from cold exposure, and omitted any note on the attire oddity. Larkin's relatives received the remains for interment, and a modest rite took place in Scranton with a sparse group of kin and pals. I joined the gathering despite no personal ties to them. Something drew me to honor the individual whose form I'd uncovered, mystery of his end aside. During the event, I chatted shortly with his daughter Rebecca, in her 30s, who expressed gratitude for locating her dad and providing the family some resolution. When I inquired about her thoughts on the attire, her eyes welled up with tears as she replied, "It all defies understanding, every bit of it. Yet now, at last, we can lay him to rest." Since then, I've gone back to Chapman Lake on numerous occasions. I retrace those familiar steps, pause at the exact location of the discovery, and hunt for insights that I realize will forever elude me. The water lies serene these days, encasing in frost through the cold months and melting come warmer weather, utterly unconcerned by the enigma it conceals. Folks who fish nearby steer clear of the spot, insisting it's cursed, with eerie glows hovering above the surface after dark and faint whispers echoing from under the frozen layer. Whether those tales hold water, I can't say, but what I unearthed that day remains vivid in my mind. And to this point, no logical account has surfaced. Over time, I've grown convinced that chronology isn't the straight path we assume. Certain spots warp it, merging yesterday with today, turning the unthinkable into fact. Chapman Lake stands as such a site. Thomas Larkin, preserved in the ice and clad in garments from a bygone time, stands as evidence that the universe sometimes unveils realities beyond science's current grasp.